Now let's rewind a little bit here. Let's kind of get the big picture of how you got started in all this. You're
Okay.
local man, played your high school ball here at St. Mark's.
Yeah.
And then walk on at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about the walk-on experience there at Notre Dame and how that worked out for you. What made you decide to walk on and for the Fighting Irish?
My dad played there, and he was I think he was an All-American there, but he was a really good player there from 68 to 72. So I grew up. My mom also went there, so I grew up not really knowing that there was any other college around other than Notre Dame. So I always wanted to go there. Always wanted to play there. I went there as a kid, went to games as a kid, was there in 1992 when they beat Florida State, was there in 88. So I always had an affinity for Notre Dame. And then my senior year of high school, they had a quarterback committed that was C.J. Leak, Chris Leak's brother. And at the last minute, he flipped to Wake Forest, and they called and said, we don't have a scholarship for you, but you come be the only quarterback in the class and walk on. I said, sure. At the time, I thought I was either going to go to SMU or Brown, but obviously when you get that opportunity and it's a childhood dream, it's something you can't overlook or pass up. Oh, no.
The opportunity to stand on that stadium and look across the end zone and see touchdown Jesus, you can't pass that opportunity up.
No.
Especially with a lifelong commitment to Notre Dame, it sounds like.
No, and I spent 4 years, 3 of them basically being on the scout team, and finally got to play my last year for about, I think it was like 17 minutes. I can't remember the exact time and letter, but people always ask me, would you do it all over again? And absolutely. I think that experience, you go from being the star on your high school football team, and having everything center around you, to being the low man on the totem pole. So, it really helped in coaching too, to understand the psychology of every player on the team and to be at both ends of the spectrum, kind of taught me what it's like and how you should really manage a football team.
And valuable experience indeed. I know that as a head coach here in high school, is that something that you help these young men with, that you're helping them find an opportunity at the next level for those that, have the opportunity to move on? Is that something that you kind of mentor with them before they take that next step to college ball, about, the transition from being the big guy here in high school to basically starting from scratch in a major college program?
Yeah, but I think being the big guy, if you're a 5-star recruit or you're one of these guys that we've had, Andrew Paul, one of these guys, you don't need a ton of mentoring from me. Everybody's telling you what you want to hear, and everybody's getting you, you're going to be, somebody special there. It's different when you go to walk on, because you're kind of lucky to be, they treat you like you're lucky to be on the team. So that's a totally different experience than what somebody who's being recruited, as a 5-star athlete's having. So, I think the really valuable perspective is for the current kids on the team that aren't necessarily the star on the team right now, being able to talk to them and share the experiences I had as, being the low person on the totem pole, and how you work your way up from there has been valuable.
Right. Well, that's one thing I've always been curious about, seeing, looking at this process from afar, as an announcer, in this particular role as a journalist, if you will, is you see how some of these very highly touted 4-star, 5-star recruits, they make the transition. They're successful in the college game, and some of them even move on to play on Sundays. But then you see some of these folks that were fantastic talents at the high school level, and they don't seem to cut it in college. Is that a breakdown somewhere? Or
I think a lot of it is just luck and opportunity. You look at guys all over the country, and nobody can break it down to a science. If they could, they'd be making tons of money. So it's just a lot of it depends on the opportunity you get, the team that's around you, the circumstances, and that's usually how people catch their breaks. Peyton Manning tells that story about him and Brandon Stewart were both at Tennessee at the same time, and he locked him out of the quarterback room, and that's how he got to start. And then the rest is history. So, all those kind of weird things happen, and it just circumstances and fall into something, and next thing you know, he's Peyton Manning.
Right, and then also you see the flip side of that too, where you see recruits that perhaps were not so highly touted, someone who may walk on, and college ball is where they blossom, and then they do get an opportunity at the next level.
Right. I think that's a much harder route, just because there's so much money tied up in scholarships. So a scholarship player is going to get the more benefit of the doubt. If you're a walk-on player, you may get one chance. You got to seize on that chance. And I think it's a lot harder to break through as a walk-on player. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it is hard.
Right. And then the path for you then, after graduating from Notre Dame in 2003, you moved immediately into coaching? Or?
No, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was a business major, and I didn't really like business. I didn't know what that really meant. couldn't really picture myself sitting
Well, no, that's
behind.
work.
I couldn't really picture myself sitting behind a desk or making
Right.
sales calls or being an accountant or anything like that. So I just kind of asked myself, what is it I really enjoy being around? And I kept gravitating towards football and mainly high school football. And so, after a while, I think I took a year to kind of figure it out. I got a job and just started coaching and fell in love with it, from that day on.
So that brings you to Parish. You joined the squad here, the coaching staff here as the offensive coordinator.
No,
Or
so
before that, even
2005, I was at Bishop Lynch as the quarterback's coach.
Right.
I was there 2 years, and then I went to Miami of Ohio. Came here for a year, then went to Miami of Ohio for 2 years, then was at the Cowboys. Well, Pitt briefly for about 6 weeks, then the Cowboys, and then back here. So that's kind of the coaching stints I've had.
And then coming back here, you started back
Yes.
on your second stint with Parish in 2011. 2011.
Yeah, in the fall of 2011 as the offensive coordinator.
And then talk about that experience. You come into Parish for the second time, so you had a little bit of familiarity with the organization, and working your way up as an offensive coordinator and then getting the opportunity to move into the head coaching position.
Yeah, when I came here, I came back, I was in development. So I was doing 2 jobs. I was raising money and being the offensive coordinator. I didn't really know whether I wanted to go back to college football or pro football or stay in high school football. But when I got here, obviously I fell in love with the place. So, being the offensive coordinator is a totally different experience than being the head coach. You're more focused just on the X's and O's and the football, and you're not having to deal with all the external things, kids getting in trouble, kids' grades, all that kind of stuff that goes into the head coaching aspect of it. You don't have to worry about as the offensive coordinator. It's much more pure coaching football. So I can sit there and just scheme all day, every day, all week, and I'm not focused on any of the other stuff that goes on. Now I'm doing both jobs. I'm still coordinating the offense, but Coach Faulkner takes a ton of that burden off of me and having to do the head coaching role. So it's different. You don't have as much time, and you're seeing the whole picture versus just my little side of the ball and how those guys are doing. I'm the defense's biggest fan. Like, if we hold them to 0 points, I'm the happiest guy in the world. I'd rather win 3-0 than 65-62. So I mean, you're kind of looking at the whole picture versus just my little slice of the pie.
Oh no, I felt the same way. I mean, not having anywhere near the experience that you have in coaching football, this stuff, but just coaching my sons growing up, and for some reason I always found myself gravitating toward the defensive side of the ball. And that was always my philosophy: is guys, if we don't score, the worst thing that happens is a tie. Or if we don't let them score, the worst thing that happens is a tie.
That's right.
So I can definitely agree with you there about being the defense's biggest fan. And we'll get to that in a little while about how the defense has been a huge contributor for the Panthers here in the 2022 campaign. So moving into the head coaching position, you take over as head coach and start to really build, because it's your key to help build the program at that point. Like you said, putting on the extra hat, getting away from just the X's and O's. And talk about that transition when they come to you and say, Coach Novakov, we want you to take the big chair. Yeah,
so it was a different challenge because at the same time we had moved up to 6A.
Right.
So my experience as the offensive coordinator was in 5A, so it's a little bit different, especially at that time. 6A was really robust, and we had just moved up, and so we were struggling a little bit. So it was almost like taking over a new program. The previous coach did a heck of a job. Obviously, they won 2 state championships, but it was at a different level, and so we were trying to get our sea legs underneath us about how we're going to compete in 6A at being the smallest. We have the smallest enrollment of any 6A football team in TAP. So that was really the biggest challenge, was going about figuring out, all right, what's going to make us successful? How can we build this program to a championship program and do it quickly? Because people don't have a ton of patience. Everybody says
that's the one thing
right
that
here, it says
really,
wins and losses don't matter.
Right.
And I say, all right, watch. When we start losing, they're going to want me fired. So, I mean, winning is a critical part of any program. And so we were trying to turn it quickly. And, we got lucky that Preston Stone happened to be an upcoming freshman, and we had a relationship. So that was a huge piece of building the program. And, I kind of feel like him and I did it together. And those kids that were that freshman class with him, we only had 5 seniors at the time I took over, which is about 20 less than we have now. So I mean, it was a really small group. We were just trying to put it all together and come up with some sort of competitive program that we could put out on the field that year, which they did. And then the rest, once that group got to be sophomores, we kind of took off.
Well, let's take a little bit here and talk about the season as we go through. I don't want to say we could probably do an entire show on each game of the season, but I don't want to wear you out like that. But we'll go through each one here real quickly. You talked about Aledo, first game of the year, 10-time defending 10-time UIL state champions. Aledo comes in here, and I was reading bulletin boards, Facebook, and everybody was just talking about how you were going to get killed.
Right.
How Parish was just going to get killed. When are they going to pull the starters? Oh, probably when Aledo is up by 50. Things like this. You go out and I'll say it. You shocked the world, 20-17. Talk
24-17.
Or 24-17. Thank you. So talk about the moment at the end of that game. 26 seconds to play. Daniel Demery knocks down that fourth down pass, and what's going through your mind when you realize you've just taken down the Aledo Bearcats?
I wasn't surprised because I know what kind of kids we have. I mean, I know people call me crazy, but I knew our kids could play with them. It was just a matter of could they overcome the psychological aspect of that's Aledo. If you take the decal off their helmet, they're not any different than anybody else that we've played.
Right.
We got a bunch of good football players too, and that was kind of the point of doing that. Was a lot of what we heard over the years was, but who do they play? Who do they play? They only play in taps, And so the point of doing that was, to try to prove to everybody, hey, you may think this little taps football league isn't anything, but it's better than what you think, and we're about to prove it here. And so that's why we set out to do what we did.
Right. I had talked about it on several of our broadcasts. I mean, you scheduled a murderer's row for the first 5 weeks of the season. You've got Aledo, Bel Air Episcopal, who, all 5 of these teams
are perennial powers. All 5 of these teams have won a state championship within the last 3 years. We talk about week 2. We go down to Houston, Bel Air Episcopal. The only game of the year so far that you played on this year so far, and probably will be, grass.
Knowing that you played on grass. You get down there, it's a muggy, horrible, wet, rains during the game, soggy field, had been raining all day. And I noticed that field had a pretty good crown to it as well. And Forrest Baldwin did the call on the game with me. He was out there before the game. He said, between the numbers and the sidelines, it's just slop.
Right.
So talk about the Bel Air game, and specifically, I want to get your thoughts on it, but also I want to ask you about, it seemed to me like there were 2 different Parish teams. You guys came out just lightning quick in the opening, the first quarter plus. Then you have the 30-minute lightning delay. What changed when they came back out after the lightning delay? Because that was a pretty close game from them. That point
number
forward.
One, they're better than people. At the time, I don't think people realized how good of a football team that was. They ended up being a really good football team. They played in the championship of their division. We had just come off of a emotional, thrilling win over Aledo, and so that's a worry as a coach. Anytime you play that and then you go play Bel Air Episcopal, the kids, you're not going to naturally have the focus you had for Aledo. We had been working towards that Aledo game all summer, all spring, and then that happens, it's over. You got to try to reload and play again, the next Friday. So you had that going into it. Then you had the weather element, the grass field element. A win is a win. You never want to say you didn't play well when you win a game, but we didn't. We didn't play up to our capabilities. And we got out to an early lead, and I think our kids thought, hey, we're invincible, we're unbeatable, and that team didn't respect them. They didn't care what they had done the week before. They were coming to beat them, and I think that was a good experience for us to realize that, and it's carried through the rest of the year. We're going to get everybody's best shot now because we are Parish, and so if we don't show up ready to play, we're liable to get beat because we're everybody's Super Bowl at this point. It didn't used to be that way. Now it's that way. It's kind of the same way we looked at Aledo. Everybody looks at Parish the same way. They want the opportunity to knock them off. And so our kids had to learn that from that game, that when you show up, everybody's going to be trying to beat you, and you got to be ready to play.
Yeah, and then to backtrack for just a second, then you talked about preparing all summer for Aledo. Did you schedule that game as the first game purposely, or did that just kind of, that's how it worked out?
A lot of it just worked out about what weeks they have open, what weeks you have open, and a lot of it also is just who's available. We ran out of people to play, so it's kind of twofold. Those were the teams that were available, but also, like I told you, get tired of hearing everybody say, but you don't play anybody. You don't play anybody. Okay, well, here you go. All right. So,
I figure you were able to schedule with Aledo, so it was just kind of serendipity that it ended up being the opener.
Yep.
Right, and then going back to finish up your thought on Bel Air.
Here's another interesting thing I'll tell everybody.
Yeah.
The Texas High School Coaches Association wrote Buchanan a letter asking him not to play us because they didn't want to lend credibility to the game. They thought it would give credibility if we were to go out there and beat a UIL team like that, it takes away the ability to say they don't play anybody. They told him they were going to even let him in the Hall of Fame for playing that game. But he kept to the game, which I give him a ton of credit. He stuck with the game.
Now, how could that possibly hurt Texas high school football?
Because they want to be able to say, but Parish doesn't play anybody. That keeps kids from wanting to go there and play.
Oh, so they're trying to keep people in there.
So they want to keep the mystique alive of UIL football, right? And so that was kind of what we set out to show was, hey, like our kids are literally just as good as anybody, the best of the best that you have to offer.
Right.
Football is football. It doesn't matter what league you play in. And I would tell you, some of the TAPS teams I've been around the last 6 years are some of the best football teams I've seen. That Bishop Dunn team, my second year, was loaded with talent.
The 2018 state champions.
Absolutely. I mean, they could beat anybody I've seen in a long time. So it doesn't matter. And I think it also gave the kids a new challenge. To go out and have some of these teams on the schedule was a way to get their attention back and not always play the same old teams year in, year out. Gave them something else to focus on for the beginning of the season, and then now they're back focused on this.
Right. And then wrapping up our thoughts on Bel Air, I mean, you've got a quarterback there who is one of the best youth triple jumpers in the world.
Yeah.
And he comes back in that second half, and then obviously he's carried the Crusaders to an excellent season. I mean, talk about that kind of talent that you have to combat from a defensive standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it was keeping him contained, which we did for most of the game. But again, it's hard. We were struggling. It was 14-0. I don't think we scored for a long time after that.
Right.
Went 17-0, and then we didn't score again until the last drive. So it starts to get frustrating. That's the thing that's really hard. As a coach, you try to balance as the head coach. You don't want your offense or your defense getting frustrated with the other. You want them, from my seat, to both play perfect games because you don't want, even going back to last week, the offense starts to be like, come on, guys, stop them, because we're having to score every time they score the first couple of drives. And, from where I sit, I want both of them to play well because that kind of keeps the harmony between the team. You don't want one side to far outpace the other side. Like Iowa has got going on in college football this year. Their defense is really good and their offense is terrible. So you're hopeful that doesn't happen, but that happened in that game where our offense, just for whatever reason, we were moving the ball. We just get in the red zone and could not finish the drives. And so it started to you knew if you kept giving him opportunities, sooner or later, that kid's talented enough that he's going to make a play, and then that's what happened. And then things got a little scary there for a minute, but luckily we were able to answer with that last drive and score and go up 24-17. And defense then held them, and we held out the game. But that game was a pivotal turning point for us as a coaching staff and kids and everybody else. That hey, we're not invincible just because we beat somebody that everybody says is good the week before. Right. They may not even be very good this year. They were 0-2 to start out the season, Alito was. So that may not even be a good football team. You don't know. So we need to get back on our grind and get going here.
They're still playing this week.
They are still playing this week.
So, and then now I kind of get more of an insight because one of the things that stuck out in my mind in this season is on the way back home, I just happened to pull into the Buc-ee's in Madisonville when the bus rolls in, and I saw you get off the bus, and I said, "Oh, great win, coach!" And you're like, "Yeah," and I could tell that you were already watching the video on the way back, and I thought, okay, he's already moved on to Austin LBJ.
Yeah, I wasn't pleased with the performance. You always are pleased with a win, but you didn't that's not how we wanted to perform in that game.
Right. And then you do turn that around next week. You get a chance to go down to Austin, another big road trip. Second week in a row, you're on the bus for 2 or 3 hours. Yeah. And you go down to Austin LBJ and avenge your only loss.
Yeah, that's an easy one because that's a revenge game. So that's an easy game to
Talk to me about that.
That was our only loss the year before. We felt like we shouldn't have lost the game, and so that's an easy week to get everybody motivated because it's a revenge game. So everybody wants to get their pound of flesh back, which is exactly what happened.
Right, and Sawyer Anderson has a fantastic game down there in Austin. 4 touchdown passes.
Yeah, I think he had 5 in that one.
5, that's right. 5 touchdown passes, 272 yards.
Yeah.
Great game all around there against the Jaguars.
Yep.
Sending them down. Then you come back home for game 4 of the season, the big one.
The big one, yep.
I mean, you invite, if Parish, you talked about earlier how Parish is the smallest school population-wise in TAPS Division I. And if you look at it from a UIL perspective, and I think that we can because you played, 3 strong UIL.
4, right?
4 strong UIL football teams this year. If Parish was a UIL school, they'd be in 3A Division I. You'd be playing with Gunter and that group.
Yep.
So then you invite the defending 5A Division II state champions to your house, and I think they were just as excited to play Parish Episcopal as Parish was to play the South Oak Cliff
Right.
Golden Bears.
Right.
Talk about that game a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's one you'd like to have back, obviously. I mean, we
Right.
felt like we let it slip away, turned the ball over. There's two things that happened in that game. Number one, I think when you walked out on the field, it looked like Alabama was out there playing against you. So our kids were a little intimidated until they realized, hey, we can play with this team. So the start wasn't great. We got down 14-0 before we even knew what happened.
Well, that's true, but I mean, I got to give Galusha's team credit. I mean, he made that opening drive took 7.5 minutes
Right.
for them to score.
Yeah.
They didn't just walk right into the end
No.
zone. So I thought, and that's where I first thought, okay, this is going to be a football game because Parish made the Golden Bears earn every yard in that first touchdown.
Yeah,
drive.
but I mean, Sawyer's first pass was intercepted.
It
so,
was.
I mean, and things didn't go the way we wanted them to in the beginning of the game. And so we get down 14-0. And then all of a sudden we get the big play from Derek and Sawyer on that 39-yard touchdown pass. And then that's the point where our kids were like, oh, like we can play with this team just like anybody else. And then from the rest of that game, we pretty much dominated the game until the last drive. The shame of that whole deal is, it's uncharacteristic, again, knock on wood, for us to turn the ball over like that. We're up 28-14 going into the fourth quarter with the ball.
Yes.
Turn the ball over. They get it. And then, we're driving with the ball, turn the ball over. Everything that could have gone wrong felt like it went wrong in that game. And then, if I could have it back again, I would have called a timeout when they're sitting there on fourth down. We did not think they were going to kick the ball.
Okay.
I didn't think the kicker was going to. I thought
You stole my question.
I thought what he was going to do was he was going to wait, take a timeout, and take one shot at the end zone.
Right.
So I didn't want to give him multiple shots at the end zone with those receivers they had from where they were to throw up Hail Marys. So Galusha and I were sitting there talking about it. We didn't think they were going to kick it. We thought they were going to just let it go, take one shot at the end zone, and go to overtime. So we didn't want to use our timeout, leave them 30 seconds, and give them 2 or 3 shots at the end zone. So we just let it go. Next thing they know, we're like, they're trotting the kicker out. And we're like, I'll be damned, they're putting the kicker out there. And then he makes that dang kick, which I would have bet a lot of money on. He wouldn't, was it a 43-yard kick?
43-yarder at the buzzer.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I had it over to do again, absolutely would have taken the timeout, and made them do something. But I never dreamt that they had that much confidence in their kicker to do that.
Oh, no, that was by far his longest field goal of his career. I think the next longest field goal he had prior to that was a 37-yarder. So that was my question. I mean, 3 quarters of very good football, followed by, let's be honest, the worst quarter of football this team's played all season.
And a stupid coaching decision. So, yeah, I mean, everything could have gone wrong.
I'm not going to go there because I want you to stay in that chair. But, no, I mean, well, the turnovers aren't coaching decisions. You turn the team turns the ball over 4 times in the fourth quarter.
As a coach, you regret, that's the thing that kills you, when they try that kicker out there and then he makes it, you're like, oh, God, I should have, should have seen that coming. You don't, but, I watched him in warm-up.
That was my thought process is you thought he doesn't have the leg.
Well, and I watched him in pregame warm-up, and it didn't seem like he had a ton of consistency, and it certainly didn't seem like they had a ton of confidence in him, but you live and you learn.
Right. So let's talk about that. The lessons learned from the lone blemish on the campaign this season.
Yeah. I mean, obviously take a timeout.
No, not so much you, but I mean, what did the kids learn from that? Because obviously they had to be pretty disgusted with themselves turning the ball over 4 times in the fourth quarter. I mean, they were up by 14 and driving going into that game, so they had to not be happy with themselves. I mean, I know the coaching staff learned some things and the players learned some things. So how have you guys been able to use that negative and turn it into a positive into what is now a 7-game win streak going into the state semifinal?
Turnovers like cancer. You don't really want to talk about turnovers because they kind of become, they just kind of take on a life of their own. So I don't ever bring it up. It's just, we just hope we don't have those experiences again. Sometimes it just happens to you and it is what it is. But the thing I think they learned from that game is they can play with anybody. I think still, even though the Alito and LBJ, I think Sock was kind of a different animal for them. And I think when they showed well in that game, obviously they were disappointed they lost. Everybody was. But I also think there was a certain sense of confidence in them that here are all these 5-star and 4-star kids, and we had them, and we should have blown them out. It should have been 35-14 going into the fourth quarter. And we're every bit as good as any of these kids are, just because we're at Parish, and they get a ton of publicity for being at SOC. We're every bit as good as this, and we're a darn good football team. I think that's more the lesson that came out of it than anything.
Right, and another, what I think is an interesting positive out of that game as well, learning what I have from the work I do for Dallas ISD is you garnered another big fan after that game, and that's Jason Todd, the head coach of the Golden Bears.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I like him a lot.
So we get to see a rematch at Kincaid Stadium next year.
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, now you take your lessons learned from the South Oak Cliff loss and put it together in what I think was the best game of the season so far, and that's the victory over China Spring. I mean, in my opinion, that a huge victory over a quality opponent. Looked like all the cylinders were firing. I mean, a couple of minor mistakes, but
here's
all
the
in
deal
all,
with
probably
that.
the most well-rounded game of the year.
Defensively, we played lights out. I would say offensively, it may have been one of our worst games. But we lost a ton of people in the sock game. We lost 3 starting offensive linemen, which was a huge problem for us. We played Landry Sattler, who did a really good job, but he had to come over from defense and play the majority of that game as a brand new offensive lineman. So that game had a bunch of other interesting challenges from a coaching perspective. Now, we had the bye right after, so if we knew if we could get through just that game and come out of it, win, and come out of it healthy, we could get some guys back. But we were down Nick Ferris, and Aiden Gilmore in that game. We were down Chase Burton.
Yep.
So, I mean, we were down a bunch of guys on offense, which made that game tough for us offensively. May not appear like it, but we never got in a rhythm after that first drive on offense. Now, a lot of that credit goes to them. They're a really good football team. But, our defense,
there's a reason they'd won 20 games in a row prior to that matchup with you.
Correct. And our defense kept us in that game, the majority of that game, and made the plays when they had to. And then obviously pull it out with Sed's run in the end was a huge play that sealed the game for us.
Right. And then after sending China Spring home, ending their 20-game win streak, it sounds to me from what you're saying the bye week could not have come at a better time. Now, was the bye week purposely scheduled halfway through the season, or did that just work out serendipity again?
Yeah. Just worked out.
Talk about how that bye week helps you guys get ready for the
We told
district
everybody
schedule.
to go away, and we'll see you guys again on Monday. So that was all
get
we
out
did.
of here for a whole week.
A whole week. We didn't do anything.
And most of the injuries were resolved by the game with
who did we play that next week? Bishop Lynch.
Bishop Lynch.
We got Nate and Nick back. We didn't get Aiden back. Was Chase back for Lynch?
Chase wasn't quite.
Chase was on his way back for Nolan. I think was Chase's first game back. So we played Lynch and Cornerstone without Aiden and Chase, and then they all came back for Nolan.
Right. And then
Chase came back. Aiden hadn't come back till Prestonwood.
Right. So you go through the bye week, you get healthier. Doesn't sound like back to 100%, but you do get some players back.
Right.
And then you roll into the district schedule against Bishop Lynch.
Yep.
The first time around, completely dominant game. I mean, your team is up 16-0 2 minutes into the ball game.
Yeah.
So talk about how that had to feel, and the first opportunity this season that we get to see the second unit come in and get some meaningful reps in a varsity game.
Yeah, well, it felt different because we'd played so many barn burners that all of a sudden to kind of pinching yourself asking, is this really happening that we're up, because we hadn't had a blowout game like that. And then, to your point, obviously it was good to get some of the guys that have been working hard in practice that hadn't had any opportunity, chance to play some varsity games, because that's tough to go 5 games standing on the sideline. So, I mean, again, as a coach, you feel for those kids because they're out there working just as hard as everybody else. They want to play. You want them to play. It's not like I get any enjoyment out of somebody not playing in a football game. So it was great for everybody to get involved and have a role in that and do something and get out there and get to play.
Right, and a convincing 44-0 victory.
Yeah.
Coach Galusha and the defense pitch a shutout in that game.
Yep.
And that carries you into your final road trip of the year to fill the hole left by John Paul II when you take the road trip down to San Antonio for Cornerstone Christian. And talking about some of those young men that didn't get a chance to play a whole lot in the first 5 games, calling that game with Forrest Baldwin, we were just stunned, could not have been more thrilled for what we saw as a breakout game for possibly your next rising star, DC Crane.
Yeah, he's really
against
good.
Cornerstone Christian. So talk a little bit about the victory over Cornerstone Christian and what DC Crane has been able to do with his opportunities he's been given this season.
Yeah, well, the victory over Cornerstone, they were missing their quarterback, and we felt real good about our game plan going into it. It kind of went the way we thought. But, he was the breakout star of that game. And, you can see he's really explosive. He's really fast. You go watch him in the weight room. He's one of the stronger kids, pound for pound. He's got everything you want in a football player. He's got the ability to be a Power 5, DB, whatever he wants to play. He played running back, he played safety. But, you really saw him come to life in that game with his 12 tackles or whatever it was. And, the
12
potential
tackles,
is there.
an interception, a fumble recovery.
Yeah.
An amazing game for Crane.
Yep.
And that gets you back home for the homecoming game with Nolan Catholic. They come out. That's kind of the first game. It reminded me a lot, this Bishop Lynch game last week, of the Nolan game. Nolan's offense comes out, and for the first 7 to 8 minutes, it's pretty strong. Kevin Arduino, the offensive coordinator, looks like he's had a pretty good game plan. Seems like the defense wasn't really ready. Now,
again, what you try to tell the kids, and that's why I keep harping on them, like, everyone's going to come with their bet. You got to be ready. And, I don't know if they all the way understand what they're up against every week, that everybody, this is their shot to take down Parish, and they're going to take their shot.
Right.
And you got to take that away from them. And what you're talking about there is exactly what happened.
Right, because Arduino had a good game plan for you guys. Mm-hmm. And then, it's toe-to-toe for about the first half of the first quarter. Yeah. And then your superior talent dominates in that game. And also the distractions in homecoming week, I'm sure that you can address. But talk a little bit about that victory where you get a little bit of a challenge in district play. Yeah. And how the kids, like you were talking about, the kids overcome that and go on to win, by 4 touchdowns.
Obviously with homecoming, they got the dress weeks and all that stuff, whatever they do. It's all the different days. And so you're fighting to keep their attention. They've seen the scores of who Nolan's played before, so they don't think it's going to be, you're trying to tell them as a coach, hey, come on. These guys have good players.
That offense had put up a lot of points, even in losses.
Points, and I think they realized after that first drive, we got a bad penalty on a running into the kicker or something like that. I think they realized, oh crap, we better show up to play here. And it's never a good feeling as a coach. I mean, you try as best you can to tell them, hey, we got to go from the jump, but that doesn't always happen. And, one of the things you want to see, when you got a good racehorse, Secretariat, whoever used to own Secretariat always talk about, they would try different things every week. They would use one of the horses to get way out in front and try to get Secretariat to run too fast, too early. Then they try this. So people are going to try a lot of stuff against you. What you want to see in your horse is the ability to adapt and overcome anything they do to you, which is what happened there. And that's, always a good feeling as a coach that even though you didn't start out great, we were able to come from behind there and kind of, do what we do and ultimately overtake the game and overpower them. And wouldn't like it to be that way. I'd much prefer the week before, but it was what it was.
Or the following week, and we'll get to that in a second. Yeah. But no, I mean, that's what I've noticed being in the booth for these games this season is, as you say, the opposing team is going to come out, they're going to take their best shot. Yeah. But the way your coaching staff, and specifically Will Galusha, you talk about having him almost as a second head coach on the field, the way that he and his coaching staff are able to adapt, overcome, put in the necessary changes to, before halftime or at least by the second half, completely eliminate what the opponent was trying to accomplish.
And we're like a yin and yang. He's ultimately confident. I'm the exact opposite. I'm worried about everything. So it's a good balance. I mean, he doesn't think anything could ever go wrong. Every week we're going to stop him. We're going to hold him to 0. And then you got me on the opposite end that's worried about everything. So it kind of balances itself out. Right. To make a rational human being.
Well, there you go. And so, a little bit of a challenge early by Nolan, but you guys take care of business, get the clock running, get the second team more work. I mean, the second team has seen work every week since the Bishop Lynch game.
Hopefully that continues.
Indeed. So we go to the week with Trinity Christian. Mm-hmm. And really, I think your main opponent that week was the weather. So you end up playing on a Saturday morning, but what I saw from that game, I wasn't able to be at that game, but I did watch a good, quick, clean game. Yeah. Get out of it injury-free, get the job done. Those young men went out on the field and went to work and took care of business. Yeah,
that was one of the better games they played. I think they were mad the game got moved, to Saturday. We wanted to play Thursday night. Again, you see all these different things from people, the gamesmanship. We'd called them earlier in the week, wanted to move the game to Thursday. They didn't want to do it because I'm sure they thought playing in the rain gives them some type of advantage. It doesn't. Both teams have to play in the rain. So all you're doing is, it's not like you're playing in a dome and we're playing in the rain. So, I don't know why people think that gives them some kind of advantage. So then they ultimately determined Friday that they wanted to move the game. So they called us about noon and moved the game Friday to Saturday, which I think got our kids irritated. And so that's why you saw what you saw there that Saturday at the game. But, it was a clean, really, defense played really well, offense played really well. Yeah.
Right, and then the weather delay moving that game to Saturday affected the following week because we had bad weather again. Yes. You wanted to play that game on Thursday, and Taps said, "Oh no."
Well, Taps didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought they.
Luckily, I'll tell you that story. Yeah, luckily, the old district president Jeff Smith called me that Thursday and said, "Dan, have you checked with Taps to see if you're able to play the game Thursday night. I said, no, why? He said, well, I was at lunch with the TCA coaches, and he said, they're just waiting on you to play the game, and then they're going to turn you in and get you guys to forfeit and get you out of the playoffs. So I called down to Taps. I was the one,
Wow.
People don't realize, I was the one that ratted us out myself because I had to get the approval from Taps, which they ultimately said no. And so we ended up playing the game, but moving the game back to Friday from Thursday because of some rule they have that's not clearly defined, in my opinion, but
About
again,
a minimum 5
5
days.
days, but
Right.
is it 5 24-hour periods? Is it 5 days? What it's not defined. So that's where the confusion came in. It was 5 24-hour periods, Saturday from 11 to Thursday at 7. They're saying it's not 5 24-hour or not 5 full days. So we had to move it back to Friday. So that's how that happened.
Right, and then Friday ends up being the bad weather moves out by the mid-afternoon, so it just ends up being cold and wet
and windy.
So, not the kind of game where Sawyer Anderson is going to be featured.
Right.
But boy, did Maddox Reed show up and just take over.
Yes, he did.
Talk about that, Brad. That had to be a highlight of the season so
Andrew
far.
Paul. That's what it felt like, with Andrew Paul every week. And,
289 yards, 5 touchdowns. Talk about that for me.
a weird stat about that game, we only ran 12 offensive plays in the second half.
Yep.
He ran, I think most of his big runs came in the second half, but you could see.
Well, 3 of the touchdowns, 37, 65, and 41 yards.
In the second half?
Yeah.
You could see at I knew or I felt like I told you earlier, I can only see a limited amount of things from the field. But one of the things I did notice was he was close in the first half. There was one where he slipped, where if he would have kept his feet, he was gone. There was a couple other ones where he just kind of missed, you saw him. So I felt like if we kept giving him the ball, that sooner or later he was going to figure it out, which was what ultimately happened.
Right.
But you could see he was really close in the first half to a couple of those runs, from being 10-yard runs to being home runs or being 3-yard runs if he didn't slip to being out the gate. So we just kind of stuck with it, and it ended up working out.
Right, and that's also the first game where you get your entire starting offensive line back healthy.
Yes.
And without those 5 guys up front, Maddox Reed doesn't gain 289
Aiden Gilmore is a
yards.
huge help to that.
Absolutely.
That's a big part of it. And then that's also the first game where our defense struggled a little bit, and that was a good thing to see that when that happened, our offense was able to kind of pick up the slack and flip the script a little bit and play complementary football there.
Right, and talk about that for a minute because A.J. Sibley tested that defense. I mean, that is a season high against Coach Galusha's defense, 169 yards. So talk about, how Coach Galusha takes that and turns it into a positive, getting a good test from a solid running back.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player. I mean, he's really hard. Obviously, he does it every week, so he's hard to tackle. But I think, having that happen kind of woke up our defense a little bit that, you got to show up every week prepared and ready to play. And, they played dominant football pretty much up until that point. So, it helped them realize they got to be there just like, every week. It's not, you can't just roll out the football. That's what you worry about every week is that they think you're just going to roll out the football and it's just going to automatically, magically happen. And it doesn't. It takes a ton of hard work. It takes a ton of preparation, and it takes a ton of luck to be where we are.
Oh, absolutely. There's a reason you actually play the game instead of hand out the trophy in August.
Yes, that's right.
So that gives you the district championship. You earn a first-round bye, and that's the week that Bishop Lynch has their first-round game against San Antonio Central Catholic. And then following the week off on the playoff bye, then we have Bishop Lynch last Saturday at Globe Life Field. Now let's talk about the playoff bye for a second. Do you see that? I mean, obviously it's great to get a week off, but do you see that as a hindrance or a help where the other team has to play that week? Is there a rust factor there, or do you guys?
You could argue either way.
Right.
I don't think there's any advantage either way. You could argue they can get on a roll because they win, and you could argue you're rusty, or you could argue you get healthy while they got to go out and get banged up. So I don't know. I don't think that's the age-old question. I don't think anybody knows the answer.
Right. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Yeah. So we come into Globe Life Field last Saturday night, and Lynch is ready to play.
Yes, they are.
I mean, you see a different Legend Howell than you saw 6 weeks earlier, where he gets pulled from that game, and Cooper Alford has to come in and mop up.
Right.
A completely different Legend Howell, a completely different passing attack. And for the first 8 minutes, it's toe-to-toe. Then they go up 14-7 with, I believe, a little over 7 minutes to play in the first quarter.
Yep.
And then you got the Sawyer Anderson and crew, they answer another great. I mean, he had 5 touchdown passes against them in the first game.
That was his best game,
and then 5 touchdown passes last Saturday. So once Coach Galusha and the defense get that first stop. They force that punt when it's 14-14, and you guys take over. And from there, it's another 28 unanswered points in the ball game. Talk about the coaching adjustments and how the team was feeling in that first 8 minutes. You touched on it earlier in our interview here about the back and forth.
Yeah,
So,
nobody likes that. I mean,
right.
that's a lot of pressure to play under, where you have to score on every drive because they're going to score on every drive. But again, you like to see the way they answered. I mean, the first drive we had, we got a penalty. It's 1st and 20, and Sawyer rips a comeback or whatever. I can't remember what we threw, but he throws to Bryson over there on the left side and gets all the yards back. He takes us right down the field and scores. Then they score, and he takes us right down the field and scores again. That's what you want to see as a coach, because that can be nerve-wracking, and you can start to feel that pressure build, and you want to see your kids answer, which they did, and you'd like to think if that kept happening, we'd keep answering. We were going to keep going until we got the job done. Obviously, our defense settled in and figured it out. We didn't need to do that. But, the good thing that came out of that game is that was Sawyer's. I mean, he's playing with a ton of confidence right now, I think. Him and those receivers now, that was the best they've looked to me all season. So, hopefully that continues to go on. And then, again, I think it was a little surprising, but they came out in a different formation than we had seen. So we were a little bit misaligned on the first drive. And then the second score, it was a 1-play or 2-play drive.
2-play, 77-yard bomb.
Yeah, and you obviously don't want that to happen, but it's going to happen at some points during the season. I
think that was the longest play you guys have given up from scrimmage all season.
I think the good thing that happened there is we ended up shutting them down. And, this is all in theory because we're about to go test it out next week. But, hopefully we show up with a renewed vigor to go out and, you want every game to go the way that first Bishop Lynch game did, where you're up 16-0 2 minutes in. That's not realistic, though.
Right.
So what you can't do is panic when that doesn't happen. And, what's wrong? What's going on? And that's kind of what you guard against.
Especially only 7 minutes or 5 minutes into the ball game. And
in a game like that, you got to guard against that because everybody is telling your kids, they're reading it, that you're going to kill them. So then all of a sudden, it's 14-14 or 14-7 with 7 minutes to go, and they're like, what's going on? That's not what you want. You just want to be like, it's okay. We got to just keep playing. We're going to be fine. We'll be fine. And I use a Floyd Mayweather analogy. If you ever watch him box, he's won all his fights. He wins them all in different ways. He's not Mike Tyson. He does not go out there and knock everybody out in the first round. There's times he'll lose the first 4 rounds and win the last 8. So you got to do whatever it is you got to do to get the job done, but you can't panic like Mike Tyson and start flailing wildly if you hadn't knocked the guy out in the first round because that's what you expected to do. Right. Recalibrate, adjust. I'll box him and let's go. We got 12 rounds.
And that's exactly what Coach Galusha did because after you guys answer and make it 14-14 late in the first quarter, then the next 3 offensive possessions for Lynch are
nothing.
Punt, turnover on downs, turnover.
Yeah.
And then it's 35-14 at halftime.
Yeah.
Now coming out at the beginning of the third quarter, I guess they thought they might catch you off guard.
Yeah.
Now that kick team you had in, did you guys sense that? Is that a hands team that was in there?
Yeah, so all the other coaches joke with me because I always tell everybody on every kickoff they're going to onside kick it. So I finally got one right. But, we came out with a kind of a hybrid hands team deal and put them out there. And, Bryson was over there, and obviously you saw what happened there.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about Bryson Fields.
Yeah, he had a breakout game.
Taking that, not only his receiving game, but then taking that opening kick of the third quarter, 51 yards to the house.
Well, that was a huge play because, it kind of took all the momentum away from them. And it was a really savvy play. That's hard to do, also to catch that ball on the run. Most people just fall to the ground and run it all the way in.
So he saw an opening.
And broke their will. But then also, he had a really good game. He had a breakout game. I think he had 95 yards catching and 2 touchdowns or a touchdown.
96 and 2, yeah.
So, that was a really good game for Bryson. He's a sophomore. There's another kid, along with DC Crane, that has an unbelievable ceiling,
Indeed.
A high ceiling that he's going to be a big-time football player.
Right. So then that brings us in to the semifinal. We've already talked quite a bit extensively about Houston, St. Thomas, and how you guys are going to address that. So just kind of as we'll wrap up here, what you're looking for from your team Saturday afternoon in Belton.
You just want them to play well. The thing you really, as a coach, you worry about is, the last thing you want is them to go out there. We've had such a good run to go out there and have this be the game where everything falls apart. To me, that's what motivates me every week is I feel like that could happen at any moment, and so we've had such an incredible run that hopefully this isn't the week where the wheels come off. And so you do everything you can preparation-wise, practice as much as you can, watch as much film as you can to prevent that from happening. And that's kind of the driver. And I think, look, 2 10-1 football teams. Obviously, everybody knows that's going to be a good football game. I obviously think we'll come out on top. I want us to come out on top, but I also want us to play well. I want the kids to play well. I want everybody to come out injury-free, and then whatever happens, happens.
Right. So then the plan there is just to have more of a workman-like type game that you did against TCA and punch that ticket for next Friday night in Waco.
Yep, that's right.
Well, Coach, I wish you all the luck.
Appreciate it.
And it's been a blast being up in the booth calling these games this season, and I hope we get to do 2 more.
I do too. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Yep.